My name is Elias Moore, and for most of my life I believed the world was limited to what could be touched, measured, and explained. I trusted routine, logic, and the quiet certainty that reality followed rules which, even if complex, were ultimately knowable. That belief ended the day I bought the house. It stood at the edge of a quiet village, built from dark stone and heavy timber, withdrawn from its neighbors as if it had consciously chosen solitude. Ivy crawled across its walls like veins beneath old skin, and the narrow windows looked less like openings and more like watchful eyes. The roof sagged slightly, not from neglect, but from age that had learned patience. The realtor spoke about it cautiously, lingering on the low price and the generous plot of land, carefully avoiding any mention of former owners. When I asked how long it had been empty, he hesitated just a moment too long before answering. I didn't press him. After years of city noise, deadlines, and faces that never remembered my name, I wanted silence, space, and the comforting illusion that nothing in this place would ever demand anything from me. The first night, I barely slept. The house creaked as if it were breathing, wood and stone shifting with a rhythm too slow and steady to be random. At times I thought something was moving beneath the floor. Not mice, not pipes, but something deeper and heavier, like stone grinding slowly against stone far below the earth. Each sound seemed to travel upward, through the beams, through my bones. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind rebelling against unfamiliar quiet. By morning, everything looked ordinary. Dust on the shelves, cobwebs in the corners, peeling wallpaper, the smell of damp age clinging stubbornly to the air. I avoided the basement for days. The door leading to it was heavy, reinforced with iron bands darkened by time, locked by a strange mechanism that didn't belong to any era I recognized. It was too deliberate, too well made for a simple cellar. On the third evening, armed with a flashlight and a resolve born more of irritation than courage, I finally went down. The stairs were steeper than expected, worn smooth by countless feet that had descended long before me. With every step, the air grew colder, yet strangely cleaner, sharper, as if I were descending not into decay, but into something carefully preserved. The basement was far larger than the house should have allowed. The walls were ancient stone, perfectly smooth, warm beneath my fingertips. That warmth unsettled me more than the cold ever could have. In the far corner stood an archway I first mistook for decorative masonry, until the air inside it trembled, bending light like heat above fire. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation of being recognized. When I reached out and touched it, the world folded inward. Light returned softly. I stood on living ground beneath a cavern ceiling so vast it resembled a buried sky. Crystalline formations glowed overhead, casting hues of emerald, amber, and deep blue. Stone roads stretched in every direction, carved with symbols that I somehow understood without reading: path, balance, boundary. The air hummed faintly, as if the world itself were breathing, and for the first time I realized the house above me was not built on land. It was built on purpose. A short, broad figure approached, hammer resting on his shoulder. His beard was braided with metal rings etched with runes, his eyes glowing like embers banked beneath ash. His name was Boren Stonehand, and when he looked at me, I felt weighed and measured, as if by the mountain itself. Behind him emerged tall, slender elves who moved without sound, led by Lethariel of the Deep Bow, whose gaze felt older than forests and sharper than steel. Fairies drifted above like living sparks, whispering in voices like distant chimes, while farther away, massive troll silhouettes watched in guarded silence. "This place is called the Root Realm," Lethariel said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. "It exists beneath and between worlds. No human comes here by chance." They led me through halls of living stone, past subterranean rivers that glowed faintly from within, and cities carved directly into the rock. I saw gnomes forging tools that hummed with quiet power, elves tending luminous gardens grown without soil, trolls standing immobile as living pillars of defense. This world was not hidden because it was weak. It was hidden because it was essential. I began to understand that what lay beneath my house was not an anomaly. It was a foundation. At the heart of the root realm stood the Hall of Memory. There I met Aurelian, the guardian of remembrance, a being so ancient his presence felt fused with the stone itself. His form was tall and indistinct, as though time itself had worn away unnecessary edges. His voice carried centuries within it. Through him, I witnessed visions of silent wars, of gates sealed at terrible cost, of sacrifices erased from history so that balance could endure. I felt grief for things I had never known, and responsibility for things I had never chosen. Aurelian spoke of the prophecy. Long ago, a guardian named Malachar sought to impose absolute order upon existence. He believed balance was weakness, that pain could be erased by removing choice itself. In his vision, worlds would be safe because they would be unable to change, unable to fail, unable to hope. When he tried to force this vision upon both realms, he was bound, not destroyed, because his death would have shattered the boundary between worlds. Only one born fully human yet tied to the gate could end what Malachar began. That one was me. I denied it. I argued, demanded proof, demanded another answer. I was no hero, no warrior, no mage, just a man who had wanted a quiet life in a quiet place. But the stone trembled beneath my feet, and somewhere far below, something ancient and patient became aware of me. And I knew, even before I returned to my house, that the choice I feared had already begun. When I returned to the house, time no longer obeyed familiar rules. I was certain I had been gone for minutes, yet dusk had already settled, stretching long shadows across the yard. The air felt heavier, as if the world itself had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. Inside, the house was silent, but not empty. It listened. That night, Malachar made himself known. He did not appear as a figure at first. He was a pressure, a distortion in the corners of my vision, a voice that seemed to rise from my own thoughts rather than the room. He spoke calmly, almost kindly, offering understanding instead of threats. He told me that what I had seen beneath the house was fragile, that the root realm was already decaying under the weight of endless compromise. Balance is cruelty disguised as virtue, he said. Choice only creates suffering. I told myself not to listen, but his words lingered long after his presence faded. By morning, cracks had appeared in the walls of my home, thin at first, like veins in stone. When I returned to the root realm, the crystals above its roads had dimmed, and the air felt strained, brittle. Training began without ceremony. Boren Stonehand taught me endurance, not of the body, but of will. Lethariel taught me perception, how to sense where the boundary between worlds thinned, how to recognize a fracture before it became a wound. Aurelian taught me memory, forcing me to witness losses that were not mine, so that I would understand what failure truly meant. They gave me an artifact called the Key. It was simple in form, forged from dark metal veined with faint light, but it carried immense weight. I learned quickly that it did not respond to strength or command. It responded only to intent. Each time I used it to seal a rift, something was taken from me in return. First, my dreams vanished. Sleep became empty and silent. Then faces began to blur, friends from my past, people whose names I knew but whose features I could no longer recall. Later, laughter disappeared, leaving behind the knowledge that something joyful had once existed, without the ability to remember how it felt. I did not complain. I believed the cost was necessary, until the day it wasn't enough. A rift opened deeper than any before, pulsing with a darkness that did not spill outward, but pulled inward, drawing the world toward it. I tried to seal it, forcing my will through the key, ignoring the pain that tore through my chest. The rift resisted. Stone collapsed. light shattered. When it was over, several of the Root Realm's guardians lay buried beneath the rubble. I had failed. Malakar's laughter echoed through the fracture, not mocking but satisfied. He no longer spoke to me as a distant presence. He spoke as an equal. Soon after, he struck through the human world. Neighbors, ordinary people who had known nothing of hidden realms or ancient wars, stood in my living room, their fears torn from them and given form. Shadows clung to them like second skins, whispering of regrets they had buried and griefs they had never healed. Malakar stood among them as a silhouette of calm certainty. "Choose," he said, "the many or the few, the world or the lives in front of you." I understood then what he truly was. Not destruction, not chaos. He was certainty without compassion. I threw the key into the rift. The act shattered something fundamental. The rift did not close. It collapsed inward, anchoring itself within me. The people fell unconscious but alive. The house stood intact, and I felt the boundary tear open inside my chest. I became the door. In the space between worlds, where time dissolved and form lost meaning, I faced Malakar directly. He appeared then not as a monster, but as a reflection of what I might become. Someone who had chosen certainty over cost. He offered me a final vision, a world without grief, without sacrifice, without loss. A world where no one ever had to choose. I refused. I accepted both light and dark within myself. Not dominance, not destruction, but responsibility. I allowed the boundary to exist through me, rather than be enforced by me. Malakar unraveled, undone not by power, but by the very choice he had denied. When I awoke, I was back in my house. The Root Realm no longer called to me directly, yet I could feel it beneath every step I took, steady and whole. Rifts no longer tore through reality. They asked, quietly, patiently, waiting for choice rather than force. I live simply now. I walk to the village. I repair fences. I sleep without dreams. I am no hero. I am no king. I am the boundary. And while I remain, the doors between worlds will know when to open and when to stay closed. The change did not come at once. In the weeks that followed, the boundary inside me settled slowly, like a river finding a new course. At first, every sound felt amplified. Footsteps carried meaning, wind felt deliberate, and silence itself seemed to watch. I learned that being the boundary did not mean constant action. It meant constant awareness. Sometimes, late at night, I sensed the Root Realm more clearly than ever before, not as a place I could enter, but as a presence beneath the world, steady and vast. I felt Boren's stone hand at his forge, striking metal in a rhythm older than memory. I felt Lethariel walking the luminous paths of her people, guarding passages that no longer needed sealing. I felt Aurelian, still watching, still remembering, relieved of a burden carried too long. The people of the village noticed small changes. Crops grew more evenly. Storms passed without violence. Conflicts ended before they began, not because fear had vanished, but because choice had become clearer. No one knew why my house stood untouched by time while others aged around it. They simply accepted it, as people accept mountains or rivers. Malakar did not vanish entirely. What remained of him existed as a warning, a lesson etched into the fabric of the worlds. I felt echoes of his certainty at times, tempting in moments of exhaustion. The desire to simplify, to remove complexity, to end struggle forever. Each time I let the thought pass. Struggle was proof of life. I understood then what the prophecy had never said aloud. The boundary was not meant to be strong forever. It was meant to be held until the worlds learned balance on their own, until choice no longer required guardians, only understanding. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and the air felt thin, I stood in the basement where the archway had once been. I placed my hand against the stone and felt nothing move. No trembling, no pull. That too was balance. I do not know how long I will remain here. Years, perhaps decades. Time treats me differently now. But when I am gone, the house will become just a house again. The root realm will remain, and the worlds will remember, in ways they cannot name, that harmony is not the absence of conflict, but the courage to choose despite it. Until that day, I keep the door without opening it.